Hello everybody and welcome back to another Addicted Fishing 101 video. My name is Jordan Knigge and today we're going to go over some helpful tips and the basics on how to use a baitcaster reel. So if you guys want to learn more and become a better caster with these baitcasters, stay tuned, it's coming at you right now. To get this video kicked off, if you guys have never heard of us before, we're Addicted Fishing. We aim to educate, entertain, and inspire anglers like you to go out there and have more fun and be more successful out on the water. If you guys haven't done so already, go down here and hit subscribe, hit that little bell notification and give this video a thumbs up, and go and check out some of our awesome fishing content from the 101 stuff all the way to the fun and entertaining content that we come out with every single day so that you guys can have more fun and learn more about fishing. So what I have in my hands here, guys, is the salmon and steelhead setup, but this is a very versatile conversation that goes in any single realm that you're going to use a baitcaster reel for. This is the main basic size 11 bearing Okuma baitcasting reel. This is a higher end one. You can do the same exact things we're talking about with the lower end one, but what we're going to talk about mainly is the vocab of the reel. We're going to talk about how to adjust your reel and how to adjust the drag. And then we're going to talk about the techniques of actually casting this, because if most of you don't know, and the ones of you who are probably watching this video are watching it because you've had a hard time learning how to cast this, and odds are your adjustments are wrong or your technique's just a little bit off. So what we're going to show you first about this reel, what I have here, again, 30-pound test. This is the setup for salmon and steelhead fishing out here in the Northwest. This goes along the same lines as any sort of bass fishing, crappie fishing, trout fishing, anywhere you're going to be using this baitcaster reel and actually casting it. I have a 30-pound test on here. This is the 8 to 17-pound rod. I use that 30-pound test or a lighter line if I'm going to be casting like this because it is easier to cast. And why that is it's not so bulky on your reel, and it comes off of your reel and goes through those guides so much easier than a big heavy 40, 50, or 60-pound test. So if I'm going to be casting any sort of lure, if I'm going to be casting any sort of big, or like, jigging presentation or a lure presentation, whether it be for bass, trout, or steelhead, I'm going to stick with under a 30-pound test. A lot of times if you're bass fishing, you're going to use a 10-pound test. And this goes for any kind of fluorocarbon, braid, or monofilament line that you're going to be using. Staying underneath that 30-pound rating is going to make you a better caster, and especially if you're just going out to practice and get better at it. What I have on the end here, and why I did this, is to make it a lot easier for you guys to see, and I'm going to recommend you all do this, is it doesn't even have to have a hook. If you want to go out and you want to practice getting better at casting these presentations, use something at least over a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce setup. Why that is because it's going to allow you to use your rod flex more. It's going to help you understand the flexibility and the action of your rod when you go to cast, and it's going to allow you to throw that out there and control that with your thumb, using that brake and using your drag setup to properly set that reel tension so that it casts correctly. The rod I'm using here today is a medium action 8 to 17-pound rod. You guys can use anything else. I know some of the bass rods out there like 15 to 30, they're a little bit heavier, but a softer action rod is always going to be better to learn with, and nothing that is too incredibly long. This is a 9.5-foot rod. They make them all the way down into 7-foot rods that you would use for different kinds of fishing, but something that's a little more of a medium action is going to be easier to learn how to cast with, but use whatever you have in your garage or on your boat to learn how to do this anyways, but the technique is not going to change. So we're going to talk about a little bit of the vocab first here. What we have here, again, we have our bail clicker. That's what opens our bail and allows our line to move. We have our brake tensioner, and there's a brake built inside this reel that's going to help you tighten and loosen. And what that does is, I'll tighten it up here nice and tight. See how my line's not coming out? What that brake does is actually controls the speed that line comes off of your reel. So I'm going to go ahead and start loosening it just a couple clicks, and you'll see how it starts to spin. If you're just learning how to cast, starting with a tighter brake is always going to help you. And as you get more in tune with how to use your thumb to naturally break that line, you're going to be able to back that tensioner off a little bit. So I'm going to start with a little bit. Basically, you want that thing falling towards the earth's surface at about 1 foot per second. So think about it. 1, 2, 3. Take it about 3 feet off the bank. 1, 2, 3. And why that is that's going to tell you how fast that spool is spinning and allow that thing to not go faster than the line is coming off of your reel. That's why we're going to use a heavier presentation so that you can actually control it with your thumb and get used to practicing holding that thumb down to use it as a natural brake rather than having to adjust your brake very tight in your reel. Along those same lines, that's going to adjust the speed that comes off is your actual tensioner here, is your drag. Now the drag you can hear spinning each time. What happens if you have too loose of a drag, you open that up, you go to reel, that line comes off there far too easy. And see my bail is still closed and that line's coming off super easy. The way I like to set it, say if I have a 30-pound test and a 15-pound leader, I like to have about 8 to 15 pounds worth of tension. And you're just gonna gauge that in your mind. So I'm gonna reel that, I'm gonna push that forward until it slowly starts to tighten up, and I'm gonna start checking my drag. Each time I tighten that about 2 or 3, 4 clicks, I'm gonna pull it again. Now I'm at about 4 pounds. I'm gonna click it 2 or 3 more times, I'm at about 6 pounds. I'm gonna go 2 or 3 more times, and I'm about 10 pounds there. I'm gonna do just a couple more, and that should be just about right. And you wanna gauge it to where you're not gonna break your leader line. If you're using a super light leader, you can go lighter on that drag setting, but having a tighter drag setting is gonna tighten up the interior of that reel along with your brake and make it harder to cast a long distance. If you wanna cast a long ways, you can loosen it all up and you can throw it all the way across the river, but we wanna find that happy medium in between. So again, we have our bail clicker, that's what lets our line out. We have our interior brake, adjust clockwise and counterclockwise. Clockwise is tightening, counter is loosening. We have our drag, which is the opposite. Counterclockwise going forward is tightening, clockwise going backwards loosening. We have our reel handle and we have our rod. So now we're gonna step down to the river here, and I'm gonna go over some of the technique on how your form should be and how you wanna use your thumb to adjust that brake and actually create that natural brake to cast your presentation well. So there's a couple different motions that you guys can use to cast this setup. If you're bass fishing, you can start to learn a little bit more of an underhand cast or a sidearm cast, but we're gonna go for the normal, chuck it over your shoulder and get it as far out there in the water as you can to get this started with for most of you anglers out there. So the first things first, what I'm always gonna do is I'm gonna leave 12 to 24 inches of line outside of my reel tip. When you're using this bait caster, you want to actually use a little bit less line. So I'm going to go with about 12 inches of line outside of my rod tip. And why that is so that I have the ability to use the weight of that presentation to flex my rod when I go to cast. And this is just a small example of getting that tip to bend. That's the importance of this medium action rod. So when I go to do this, what I'm going to start with, I'm going to start with 12 inches out. I'm going to go at 45 degrees over my shoulder. What I don't want to do is start my cast down here. And why that is because you're gonna create so much speed going up and forward that you're gonna throw that jig faster than your reel can keep up with it. That's the beauty of this. You have to find that happy medium in between where your jig or your presentation is going as fast as your line is coming off of your reel. So adjusting that brake, adjusting your form is gonna contradict that, and it's gonna help you find that balance. So 45 degrees, 12 inches of line out, 45 degrees over the bank behind me. I'm gonna click my thumb and hold down on that line just like so. Clicker's down at the base. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna identify my target. What you don't wanna do is watch your actual presentation fly through the air. It's like throwing a baseball or a football. You don't wanna watch the ball fly through the air or you're never gonna hit your target. You wanna stare at your spot, lock eyes on that target, and cast your rod tip to that target, ending your cast at 45 degrees over the water, right at the place you wanna be throwing it. Again, you hear me stressing the 45s, 45 to 45. Your rod tip will put your lure wherever you point it. So if you point your rod tip down at the water at the end of the cast, your lure is gonna go down into the end of the water. If you throw it to the left at the end of your cast, it's gonna go to the left. If you throw it to the right, so far the right. So keeping that in mind, identifying your target, moving your rod tip forward in a slow to fast motion, stopping it at 3/4 of the distance is where you're gonna actually let go of that spool, is at 3/4 of the cast, letting it fly through the air, locking your eyes on that target, and then stopping it with your thumb right before it hits the water. And I'm gonna go ahead and go do an example really quick. So 45 over the water, rod hand, thumb on the reel, hand on the rod butt, pulling the rod butt down, pushing your right hand forward, and stopping at 3/4 and letting go with your thumb, letting that thing fly. You're gonna get the maximum amount of load in your rod, just like so. So you saw the whole time, and you could almost hear it, how I had my thumb on that line a little bit so that I didn't have too much line going out, going faster than the lure is flying through the air. If that's the case, and at that time I had to keep my thumb on it a little too much, I'm gonna tighten that brake 2 or 3 times, and I'm gonna reel her back in and try it again. So, step 1, 12 inches of line out, 45 degrees over my shoulder, rod, left hand on the rod butt, right hand on the reel, pulling down, pushing up, stopping at 3/4 and letting go with your thumb and aiming my rod tip right where I want my target to be. So making that small adjustment, if you do get a backlash immediately, doing 2 or 3 clicks tighter is gonna help you get closer and closer to not creating those backlashes. So now that that's happened again, reel it back in, 45 degrees over, and I want you to actually watch what I'm doing with my thumb, how I'm stopping the line right before it hits the water this time, ending with my rod tip out over the water, landing right where I want my destination to be, and then reeling back in. So 45 degrees over, 12 inches out, hand on the rod butt, hand on the reel, ending 45 degrees over the water, went right exactly where I was pointing my rod tip, and I stopped that line with my thumb right before it hit the water. And the key to that is because once it hits the water, your bail is obviously still spinning and creating that movement of line off the reel, but your lure isn't flying any further. So that's how you're gonna avoid that backlash at the end of your cast. You have your brake set correctly, that can still make a backlash when it hits the water. So right before it hits the water, stop it with your thumb, create that break by itself, and start to reel. All right, you guys, we hope that those tips helped you a little bit more understand the dynamic and the technique of how you want to start to use these baitcaster reels. Really the best thing to do, like I said, is go out to the water, put an 1.5 ounce or ounce weight on with no hook, and sit there, adjust your brake, and practice that cast so that you're not going to be losing lures, you're not going to be losing valuable fishing time, and you're going to be able to get that technique down and understand how you want to have that natural break along with the actual brakes and the mechanics of that reel. If you guys have any more questions, be sure to drop these comments below with the questions. We'll be happy to answer them. And again, comment some of the comments below on what you guys want to see more in these 101 videos. You guys, if you haven't already, hit that little subscribe button, hit that bell notification, give this video a thumbs up. You stay fishy and we'll see you out there.